and welcome back to this month's episode of Winning the Challenger Sale. We are so excited to have you with us today. I keep saying we. Those of you that have joined us before will notice that today it's just me and not Mike Randazzo. So I do want to take a moment to acknowledge that. Mike was really the ideas and the brains behind doing the Winning the Challenger Sale series about 3 years ago. And Mike recently had an opportunity to take on a really exciting role at a new organization to run sales enablement. And so I just want to take this moment to say, one, Mike, we miss you. We are so proud of you. We are so excited to see you shine in this new role. Thank you for everything you've done with Winning the Challenger Sale. I will do my best to carry the torch forward and keep the momentum going. So for those of you that have joined us before, please join me in congratulating Mike and wishing him nothing but the very best in his role moving forward. So with that, super excited to have you here today. As many of you know, today's topic is one that is so near and dear to my heart. It's opportunity prioritization. Now, it might not sound like the world's sexiest topic, but I think it's a really fun one because I think many of us who grew up in sales learned how to think about opportunity prioritization in a very, very similar way. And my hope is in the time we have together today, which will be about 30 minutes, and then those of you that want to stay on a little bit longer to ask Q&A, you certainly can, or you can hop off. We're hopefully going to introduce a new way of thinking about opportunity prioritization to help you avoid wasting less time on opportunities that just simply don't convert. So again, thank you for being with us today. Please join us in the chat, ask questions, push back, challenge us, but we're glad to have you. So let's dig right in. Those of you who recognize this dude, I'm a huge Napoleon Dynamite fan. I think the point of what we're trying to avoid here today is we've all been here before. We're working on an opportunity. We think it's going well. There's a ton of interest. Things are moving. And then we get the dreaded, you know what, Jen, call me back in 6 months. It's just not the right time, right? If you've heard this before in the chat, heck, if you've heard it today or this week, put it in the chat. This is sort of our worst nightmare, right? And we make the joke, I guess you could say things are pretty serious. We know they're not, right? We know that when this happens, ultimately what that prospect is saying to us is, I just don't see enough value in what you're trying to sell me to make it worth the risk of going through the motion. Now, we're going to spend a little bit of time up front before we get into the tactical, how do I prioritize my territory, talking about this. Because some of you who have joined us before are quite familiar with this particular status quo problem, right? So on the left, this is research we did at Challenger to understand just how often are we actually losing, not to our competitors, not on price, not on our product, but actually just to the customer saying, I'm just going to stick with what I'm doing because what I'm doing may not be the best, but it's what I know. And good is good enough, right? And what we found is on average, 38% of pipeline opportunities actually are lost to this reason. As you can see on the page, what this ultimately means is sometimes status quo's win rate is higher than our own. And so we're going to put a poll in a second here and ask you how many opportunities you're working on. And the reason we're going to do that is because I want everybody to go beyond the 38%, right? The 38% is a big number. It's a little bit scary, but it's not unique to you as an individual seller. And what I want to take us through for a minute is the math on this, right? So based on the number of opportunities you pursue each month, there's a number of hours you are absolutely throwing out the window to these no decision losses. So let's say, for sake of example, I'm going after 20 pursuits a month. Maybe I've got a smaller price point, B2B sale. It's a more transactional sale, and I am losing 38% of the time. That means on average, every month, I'm losing about 8 deals to this. Now, that might not seem like a lot, but consider all of the work we put into those deals, right? Consider finding them, crafting the email outreach, getting any SME support or resources on it, writing the business case, doing the demos, all of that time that goes into it. Sometimes I think 8 hours is actually a low ball number, but let's say for sake of example, it's 8 hours a month we're spending on these deals we lose. if this looks like your world, this means you are losing 64 hours every single month to no decision. And it looks like there's about 15% of the audience who fall into this camp. There's about 19% of you that are in the 11 to 20 range, a good chunk of you that are in the 6 to 10, and you can see the results moving forward, right? So one thing I would encourage everyone to do is, coming out of the call today, think about, one, what is my math, right? You can swap out the number of pursuits here. You can swap out the number of average hours you're spending on those opportunities. And then I want everybody to think about, what are all the million things you'd rather be doing with your time that aren't chasing opportunities that never buy, right? And this is ultimately the problem that I want us to think about and solve today. So let's talk about that, because here's the kicker, right? Those of you that are familiar with Challenger, if you've joined us before, you'll recognize this language on the page. It's a framework we call Tempo. It's essentially just a simplified way of thinking about what are the motions that we as sellers go through in pursuit of winning a sale. So if you start on the left, I've got to pick the right opportunities to spend my time on. Then once I've picked them, I've got to figure out, how do I get them to want to talk to me? If it's cold calling, cold emailing, social, texting, video, whatever, right? I've got to find a meaningful way to engage them and convince them to give me their time. Then once I do that and they're in the motion, now I've got to manage all of the complexities of getting them to buy and agree and move forward. We put that in sort of the manage camp. And then I've got to plan to close it. So that means I've got to negotiate it and win it, right? What we don't have on the screen is the O in Tempo, which is I've got to operate and grow it. But if you think about the 38% problem, you think about the status quo problem that many of us are challenged with, here is the kicker. We often don't see that problem present until we've already invested those 64 hours, right? We feel it here, or sometimes even here. This is when the customer may ghost us. This is when the customer may give us that dreaded, call me back in 6 months, or it's not the right time, or another priority has taken precedent over this one. And when that happens, we are then in a motion where we are reacting, right? We're trying to save the deal. And we're trying to save it because as individuals, we've invested heavily our time, our energy, our credibility, our reputation. This is, at this point, it's forecasted, right? I don't want to let my manager down, my business down. And so we fight and we react to try to solve it. I am not saying that this is bad. This will always happen. There is no way to eliminate this problem from happening. But what I am here today to say is to think about, how often are we fighting these fires late stage? Because maybe, just maybe, we haven't really thought about the 38% problem in the target stage. When we get our territories in January, or when we get, new opportunities, have we relied, perhaps over-relied, on traditional measures for opportunity prioritization that don't take into account this emerging behavior from customers on no decision? And so in the time we have today, what I'm really excited about is giving some new ideas, hopefully, on how you can start preventing the no decision problem in the way you target and prioritize your opportunities, so that you are fighting this less late stage. And again, it will not eliminate it. We will always have those customers that realize late stage, hey, I'm getting freaked out, I'm not ready to move forward. We still have to react to it. But I would love to be able to get into a motion where we're preempting it instead of simply reacting. So that's what we're here to talk about today. Okay, so let's first and foremost talk about some of the traditional ways we typically prioritize a territory. And the first thing I want to say is, I am not here to knock any of these, right? I'll be super candid with you. As many of you know, I still carry a bag. I've been selling for 17 years. There has not been a single year where I did not look at factors like this when I'm prioritizing my territory. So it's things like, hey, if there's an industry we know we play particularly well in, if there's a particular size, hey, we really play well in the upper mid-market, or we're all about the large enterprise customer, or we really like the small business customer, we take that into consideration. Or maybe there's a sweet spot on employee size, and certain employee size we wouldn't even consider working with. Or maybe we're looking at previous customers. How do we find those? I still really, really like using that one. In some cases, we're looking at funding, or if you're an account manager and you're managing existing accounts, we might be looking and prioritizing based on current spend with our business. Now, again, none of these are bad. The only thing I would say is that perhaps, just perhaps, they're insufficient, right? And so when we look at these things, these help us narrow large opportunity worlds down to something manageable. So in my case, I'm working with hundreds of potential opportunities. I can't go one by one down a list of 800 opportunities. I have to use these measures to get it down to something manageable. But where do I go from here? Because ultimately, when we think about the no decision problem, this is why it's existing, right? Many of you have seen this. We call it the spaghetti chart. It's from Gartner. Love this graphic because I think what it does is it really illustrates just how frustrating it is for customers to buy, right? It is not this classic left to right motion of I've identified a problem and now I'm going to find a solution and I'm going to build a list of requirements and then I buy my, pick my supplier. Sales would be so easy if that was the job. And candidly, I don't care if you are selling a $5,000 product or a $5 million product. This is still happening. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was part of a decision process recently for a price point that was less than $5,000. And oftentimes we think of, well, we only need to think about this if we're selling something big. But what's fascinating to me is I think the trigger is less about the price point and far more about the disruption that your product or solution causes, right? So in this instance, we were looking at a solution that was going to affect how our customers engage with us. It was going to affect how SDRs do their job. It was going to affect how AEs do their job, and it's going to affect how marketing does their job. And so what happens? We take a very small purchase, and then we start sourcing different people to weigh in on that conversation. And what happens, right? We've talked about this on previous episodes. The minute you start increasing the size of the people on that committee, the minute that dysfunction starts happening. And so again, don't think of this as much of this only applies when I'm selling a big CRM system. This applies even in some of these smaller, which more seemingly more transactional experiences, because when we are thinking about change, when we are thinking about disruption as buyers, we are trying to mitigate risk. Right. And so when we prioritize our opportunities, what we have to find are the opportunities who are willing to tolerate this, because it's ugly. It's hard. Sales is hard. Buying's hard too. So we've got to be sure that when I look at who I'm spending my precious time with as a seller, I'm finding people where the pain is going to be worth all of this pain of buying. Now, many of you, and especially those that I've worked with directly, know my fondness for this. I always find a way to plug it because I truly believe that this is the number one thing that we as sellers need to have in our mind, which is I rarely can get a buyer today to cross the finish line unless I get this equation right. I've got to prove to them that the pain of what they're currently doing, how they're currently solving the problem that our solution addresses, is actually far greater than the slide we just looked at, right? Because you see this everywhere. You go on websites, you go on, trade shows, you go on webinars, and it's always, we have a better way. We have a faster way. We have a smarter way. And customers will look us in the face and agree with it. And they'll say, you're right. You've got a better way of doing that than we have it right now. But I'm not willing to go through the last slide to get better because I think good is good enough, right? So I introduced this on this topic. I know it might seem slightly not related, because this is core to how challengers approach opportunity prioritization. And this, again, I can't reiterate enough, this is always in the back of challengers' minds. And if we think about the goal we have at hand, right, which is like, I don't want to lose no decision losses late stage, because at that point, I've already invested my 64 hours. I want to get better at disqualification, but I need some sort of structured framework for thinking about it so I'm not throwing out opportunities that I might regret. And I certainly want to waste less time. So here's what I'm going to take us through in the remaining time we have together. I want to get really tactical about how challengers actually take their opportunity universe and find a scalable way to seek out those opportunities where the pain of same is greater than the pain of change we're asking them to make. Now, you're going to see 3 steps with something in bold on the screen here, right? I want to reiterate again, use your publicly available information, the stuff we talked about in a couple previous slides, to filter your territory down. I do not want to throw that away. It is still an important measure to use. We're just not going to talk about it today because many of us are already doing those things, right? So figure out your ICP, take that big opportunity universe, narrow it down so that we have a workable set of opportunities to now trying to prioritize into like tier 1, 2, 3, ABC, whatever sort of mechanism that you use. The 3 steps we're going to go through that are essential here, and they're in order, are first, we've got to create scalable reframes. Those of you that are already familiar with Challenger know what a reframe is. We'll talk about it very briefly. For those of you that are not, we've got to create the reframe first. We've got to figure out what is the pain our customers are facing that they're underappreciating. Second, then we're going to use something we call reframe potential, which is based off that reframe. I'm now going to gauge that limited opportunity universe I've just narrowed down into a high, medium, low. How much potential do I see with public information that they are facing the problem that I address in that reframe? And third, we're going to segment our territory into something I like to call reframe plays. We are not going to go one by one and try to find out what every individual company is trying to do. We are going to make broader assumptions so that we can get scale, right? So we'll talk about what those are. So that's the plan. That's how we're going to take the next time. So some of you are probably familiar with the Dan Pink book, To Sell is Human. I love this phrase because I think when sales really started to make sense to me personally is when I stopped overthinking what selling is all about. Selling is just human selling to humans. It's humans trying to get other people to change, right? Sometimes we overcomplicate it. I'm trying to convince someone to change, and that is hard, right? The reason it is so hard is because oftentimes we look at a customer behavior and we say, I want my customer to change that behavior so that they buy what I have to sell them. What we fail to appreciate sometimes is those customer behaviors are informed by assumptions, beliefs that those customers, through information, through peer influence, through watching something, have formed over time. So the bar is really, really high to change a behavior. And if I, as a seller, am trying to win that fight to say, your behavior is wrong and my behavior suggestion is right, buy my solution, what we're going to find is we're going to lose that battle quite a bit, right? And let me just see, is everyone still seeing? Oh, technical fun. Okay. Can everybody see my screen now? All right. Thank you guys and gals. So iceberg, obviously iceberg graphic, right? So we are trying to change behaviors. Those behaviors are informed by assumptions and beliefs. So when we talk about building a reframe, this is when reframes kind of made sense to me. A reframe is getting a customer not to think differently about us. It's to get the customer to think differently about their very own business, right? And in order to do so, we as sellers have to put ourselves in the shoes of our customers. What you will see here is a very simple framework. I would love it if everybody on this call, if you're not doing this already, can take a particular customer opportunity you're working on and think about this, right? What is the customer currently doing without us? And then why do they do this? And by the way, what is not an acceptable answer here is because they don't know any better, right? What are the beliefs and assumptions that inform that customer's belief that they should do this the way they do it? And then what is the thing they don't realize about the approach, right? This is what we call a reframe. This is so core because what we are trying to do here is we're trying to understand from the customer's perspective, what is it that forms their belief system that they don't need us? So we're going to put up a poll in a second. We have a wide variety of people that join us for this process. I'm personally just very curious on how many of you have actually been trained in building these versus you're relying on this to kind of help you get there. So take a minute, respond to the poll, but this is a very core central part. If you haven't seen this before, we did a whole episode on this back in season 1. You can access all of the old episodes. This is worth spending your time on because this is so integral to the rest of the exercise. So step 1 is we've got to think about the world from our customer's shoes. Now, step 2, I've actually broken out into an AM and an AE motion. Some of you may do both, so lessons learned from both, but I do think there's a slight nuance. If I am a AE, meaning I am a new logo pursuer, what I am now going to do is I'm going to take that opportunity universe, I'm going to take that reframe I just built, and now as I look at my short list of opportunities, I'm going to ask myself these 4 questions. So does company A have the status quo behavior that this reframe is about? That's a yes or no question, right? What is that behavior? We've already identified it in the reframe exercise. Now, what incorrect assumptions for this company led to this behavior, right? Sometimes we don't know. Sometimes it's just our best guess. That's okay. It's the idea that we're thinking about this and we're thinking from the customer perspective. Third, now we're looking at what doesn't the customer know about the problem, but they should. And then lastly, this is the meter here. And this is super simple. It's not like rocket science, right? We're now saying, based on the three answers above, is the pain of same for this customer actually greater than the pain of change? Now, I'm going to give you a really specific example of this to kind of bring this to life. We were having a conversation as a team a couple of weeks ago, right? And there was a high growth tech company we were looking at. They have 76% market share, massive sales team. So if I had just stopped at the traditional measures for prioritizing my opportunities, that baby would have been an A. It would have been a tier one, whatever we want to call it. I would have been like, yes, big opportunity versus big chance to go and sell something big to that company. But what I would have failed to appreciate is that maybe, just maybe, that customer didn't actually feel the pain of same at a same level that someone who may have 5% market share, huge pressure to grow, would have felt. And so when I talk about this as an and, not an or, it's because what I want to get away from, and a mistake I made all the time when I was not just early, but midway through my selling career, was I would get really distracted by these big, sexy logos and I'd go spend a bunch of time on them without really considering, would it even be worth it for this customer to go through that ugly spaghetti slide? Or is the pain even that big? Now, I'm not saying you necessarily need to throw it out, but it is worth considering, do I have a reframe that's going to allow me to tell that story in such a way that this is high? If I don't, my time actually might be better spent with a different opportunity, right? So this is something we call reframe potential. Now, if I am an account manager and I'm looking at upsell or cross-sell opportunity, I'm not going to spend a lot of time over here, right? These are obvious. If there's a bad fit, they already have everything we have to offer. Of course, I'm not going to spend my time and prioritize that opportunity to try to upsell or cross-sell. The medium might be, hey, there's some things they don't buy from us, but there's some reasons why they probably wouldn't. So let's say like their buyer has recently left the organization and we don't have a replacement yet, right? That might be in some cases a reason to buy. In many cases, it might be a reason not to buy. You've got to consider that. And then high might be, I look at my reframe, I look at what they've bought from us so far, or how they're engaging in our service that we've sold them. And I'm realizing there's a big miss there. There's something that they've overlooked or they've missed. That's where, as an account manager, I'm going to want to spend my time, right? Because I've got a solid case for change. I can size the pain from them, like we talk about in Challenger. That's a way to sort of think as an AM about where I'm spending my time for upsell or cross-sell. Now, third step is something I call reframe plays. And I wanted to give you an example because this is a bit of an intangible concept. We've built a reframe. We've started to look at opportunities that we've subsegmented down. What I want to be very cautious about is most of us as sellers don't have the luxury to go one by one and do deep analysis on every company and come up with a PhD thesis on every organization. Sales would be awesome if we had the time or the resources to do that. But the reality is sometimes we are limited on time and capacity. So the reason I put this as step 3 is because one of the most powerful ways I see sellers get scale is by saying there are statements about our potential opportunities that we can make that allow me to understand what is the motion or what is the sentiment I'm going to have to overcome when I'm running this replay with that particular customer or reframe with that particular customer. So I put 3 up here. They may look different for you, right? But I would encourage you to think about through the lens of what are the different flavors of that reframe, because not everybody sees it similarly. So the ones I put up here, 1, my prospect actually doesn't even realize that the status quo is costing them, meaning like the executive isn't even aware. They think life is good. Let's think of like the blockbusters, right? Netflix came on the scene and Blockbuster is like, who cares? No one's going to buy, movies online. We're going to keep selling videos and DVDs. We're good, right? That to me, in some cases, is something an AE might like, they might hate. Some AEs might like it because they'll say they're not already recognizing the problem. They're not in emotion. They haven't even looked at my competitors yet. Like, this is an opportunity for me to be the person that educates that executive on the problem, which gives me a first mover advantage. Some people might say, I don't want to spend my time there because it's going to take me longer, right? This is a personal preference. If you are an SDR on the line, I would encourage you to think about aligning with your AE. What is the preference that they have? Do they like opportunities like this? Do they hate opportunities like this? If you are an AE, consider, have I told my SDR if I like these or hate these? Right. So that's scenario one. Scenario two might be, my prospect actually has the right priorities. They know there's a problem, but the way that they're going after solving it, we know has the wrong root cause, right? So you've already got that person who's in the motion of saying, the house isn't as tidy as we'd like it. We've got to do something different. But there's something different doesn't align with the solution or the reframe that you're selling them. And so in this motion, there's a lot of AEs who love this, right? Because it's already like, we recognize there's a problem. Maybe we've assigned budget. Maybe we've got people who are thinking about this. Now, if I can come in and show them and reframe them on how they're thinking about that problem, I might be able to separate myself from my competitors, right? So that's another example. Last example, sometimes we run into cases where prospects like, I already know who you are. So I know the problem. I got the right root cause, but maybe I'm DIYing it. Maybe I already have another solution that I think is very similar to you. I hope you can start to see that these three scenarios are all based on the same problem, the same reframe, but we can't treat them the same. Right? Because if I'm talking to someone who thinks they already know what we do, they think they're already doing it, or they're doing it with a competitor, I don't want to go in and teach them about the problem that they have, because they're going to look at me and say, yeah, we already got it. We already know what we're doing here. And so these three different plays recognize and acknowledge that customers may have different reactions or current states around that. Right? So in this particular one, right, we may have to think differently about it, thinking about the solution that they have in place instead of spending as much time on the problem. So ultimately, this is just three I put up there, but every individual, like, one of the things I think we often don't give ourselves enough credit for is a lot of this stuff is in our heads. But do we take the time to structure our opportunities, structure our territory in this way? Maybe not, right? This is something I started doing a couple of years ago, never did it before that. And since I've started doing it, it's really helped me spend more time, have greater confidence on the people I was calling on, and not waste as much time on the wrong opportunities. So 3 steps to kind of think beyond just the traditional measures of opportunity prioritization. Now, key takeaways, right? This is our summary slide. Time is so valuable. We don't want to waste time on the 38% problem. We certainly don't want to always react to it. There will always be some reactivity that we have to do late stage. It's just part of the game. But the degree to which we can find the right opportunities that we have a high level of confidence, have the problem, have the pain, are worth going through that pain of change to overcome the pain of same, that's where we want to be spending our time, right? And think about, if you're an SDR, if you're a newer AE, I want to be picking up that phone with a high level of confidence that I'm calling someone who's going to respond favorably to a problem that they have, right? Instead of calling them and trying to sell them on our ROI or our solution or our benefits, this is the type of executive level conversation we want to be having. So in order to do that, we've got to think about the world from our customer's view. We've got to think about status quo. We've got to think about those reframes. And then we want to get scale by looking at what are the common patterns we see around those reframes so we can get maximum value of the time we spend in building them. So in a moment, we're going to take some questions. I see some Q&A in there. Feel free, as I'm talking about this, put them in the chat. If you've got more questions, Emma's going to help me out with that. Next month is a topic I'm so excited about. This is something I seriously struggled with a ton as a seller because, and many of you, if you sell a technical solution, may feel the same pain. We oftentimes can get the rational story really, really right. Here's the case for change. Here's the cost of pain. But sometimes as sellers, especially those of us who have a technical sale, we rely too much on that. And we forget there's a human on the end of the line. And there's a human emotional component to all the ways that we make decisions. And so next month is going to be about how do we tell a story for change in a way that evokes a really emotional reaction that gets that person who says, yep, the math makes sense, to stand up and say, now I'm going to go advocate for you. And now many of you who join us on the webinar are aware that we do a podcast. So if you're not as aware, right? This webinar is about teaching you practical tactics, breaking things down into simple motions. The podcast is quite different in the sense that we're bringing in people that we believe think like challengers to share their perspective on this topic. So every month we pick this topic. Every week we've got a different outside presenter to come in and have a conversation about how they think about it. So those of you that follow along will know that Will Aiken from Sales Speed and Vidyard was on with us this week talking about how he thinks about opportunity prioritization. I highly recommend this. This is straight from a seller who I believe gets this really right. We've had Amy Volas on social selling a couple months ago. And many of you who are familiar with Challenger will recognize Brent Adamson's name. He was co-author of the book. And this is a man who stands in front of CEOs, in front of stages of thousands of people, and tells stories to get them to change and think differently. I can think of no better guest to have on next month to talk about persuasive storytelling. So those of you that are Brent Adamson fans, I know there's a lot of them. He'll be on with us next month. Please check us out on the podcast. Follow me on LinkedIn, connect with me on LinkedIn, ask me your questions, follow Challenger. And thank you so much for being with us today. Really appreciate everyone's time. Good day, everybody.